Hi, everybody. So Dilo was a rare find because he's difficult to get hold of. And it's a real privilege for me to introduce him to this forum. He's a product of St. Anthony's Catugastute and joined the batch of 74 Colombo Medical College. He's a retired eye surgeon. He doesn't want me to talk a lot about him because he says he will do that himself. Suffice to say, he lives in a small village called Tatsfield in Kent, which is only about 20 minutes from our house in Surrey, with his wife and dog. And the last thing he once mentioned is that he's mad about cricket. And he plays for Surrey's over 70s. So we had to grab him before the cricket season started. Okay, that's it. Thank you, Dilo.
Thank you, Rasika. I'd like to introduce myself because then I can say the things that are really nice. Okay, let's move. I just want to do me because I moved from being an ophthalmologist to now being primarily a health coach. So I was an ophthalmologist for 40 odd years. I worked more than 35 years in the NHS. Loved it almost towards the very end, and then management just got so bad that I just moved into private practice. In 2020, I got COVID quite badly, right at the beginning. I have to remember to say, I didn't get COVID, COVID got me. And as a result, fortunately, because it was right at the beginning, I didn't know how bad COVID could be. COVID had just come in, couldn't test for COVID. I pretty much was sure I had COVID, but it took 6 months later for the test to appear. But when lockdown became a bit easy and I thought I had recovered, by that time I had got symptoms of long COVID. Among other things, I got something like an MS syndrome. So my fingers used to go numb once in a while. And I thought maybe not the best thing for an eye surgeon. So I retired earlier than planned. I was then pretty much enjoying my retirement because it gave me a lot more time to play cricket. It was once we had been allowed back on the field. But then what happened was 2022 December to 2023 early, I had two, well, in retrospect, ginormous subdural bleeds. Because of my long COVID symptoms, when I started falling about, I already had vertigo and I already had some of the symptoms. So I just presumed I was having a bad spell of the long COVID. But when by sort of late December, early January 23, I was falling with, all I can say is probably great regularity. And then other things started to appear, particularly the fact that when I fell down, I peed my pants. So I thought, okay, time to get it checked. Went into my local hospital, which I still had lots of contacts there. Both I and the consultant who saw me when I walked in were pretty convinced I had probably a horrible brain tumor of some sort. But fortunately, the scan showed that what I had was two really, really large subdurals. So much so that it's a wonder that I didn't, sorry, talking a bit of medicine here, but I didn't cone and kill myself. I was rushed off to George's to have surgery. Usual stuff, I got there and I was told to hurry up and wait. So I waited 2 days, but I was quite comfortable because I could see people coming into neurosurgery had worse problems. I went into theater. I was told with the size of the hemorrhages and all my symptoms to expect a sort of 50-50 chance I would actually walk out. And when I did walk out and got back to the ward, I was almost delirious with some great happiness. And I pretty much took over the whole ward in my happiness, reorganized all the patients, make them happy too. And although I had been told that I would probably need to spend 6 to 8 weeks in hospital rehab, and they would arrange for me to be transferred, I recovered so quickly that, and my wife says it's because I was so damn annoying. They kicked me out in 6 days and said, go have community rehab at home. Having got to that point, I was pretty convinced that I could probably rehab myself. You see a common theme here that I think I can do many things myself. So I started my own rehab plan. I did lots of research, which was very fortunate because when I did, after 2 weeks, ring up the community team to find out what was happening, they said, oh, we wouldn't have got you anyway for 6 weeks. By which time I think I would have been a little vegetable watching TV. Anyhow, I then decided that I need to get back to understanding lots of new stuff about medicine and so on. And I learned that there had been massive changes about the understanding of, well, pretty much all of my conditions, which are all chronic disease, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, lipids, gastric reflux, and hypothyroidism. Now, I've had, by the time I got to hospital with my brain bleeds, I've had all these conditions for over 10 years. And I was on multiple tablets. I applied all my new knowledge to this, and I came off all my tablets within 6 months. And my GP, who was very frustrated by the fact that I was not following his orders and curing myself, which I know as doctors, we don't like people curing themselves. It gives us a bad reputation. Anyhow, I thought, okay, that's great. I've done it to myself. All my tests were coming back normal. So I thought, okay, let me see whether I can tell a few of my friends and family. And I got a few volunteers who said they'll try it out, and they all got better. They started losing weight. 3 of the diabetics, 2 of them completely kicked diabetes. 1 cut his insulin by half, another one. And 1, interestingly, who was one of my nephews in Sri Lanka, who had already started liver disease. Within 6 months, his liver disease completely resolved. He had fatty liver. So I thought, okay, I could probably do this with wide audiences. I wanted to do it. So I then started going down as a health coach. Now, a little bit, I already had my medical degrees and ophthalmology degree. With ophthalmology, there's lots of technology involved. So I had done a biomedical engineering degree. And because I got into teaching a lot, I did a certificate from King's for teaching. You see a common trend here. When I don't have to do something, I do it. When I have to do it like uni, I spend time chasing girls. I also got so much involved in hospital management that I did 2 lots of quality assurance, 6 Sigma. And then that's what I went through all of my medical career in hospitals. When I got into health coaching, although I was doing stuff, I had no formal qualifications. I couldn't be bothered doing a proper one in university. So I did multiple diplomas and certificates online, which I will stress, they are very low level teaching, but they gave me letters I could put on my name so that if people said, how did you become a health coach? I could say I had done these things. I had practiced mindfulness for many, many years. In fact, for more than 10 years before I got ill. And I had found that that helped a lot with my patients, even in ophthalmology. And then I thought, okay, I better do something more formal. And I got, again, an online diploma. It was long and tedious, but not like doing a proper formal university. But as I started coaching people in health, I realized that a lot of people had tried to become healthier. They had, many of them, multiple times gone through measures to lose weight. Some of them had tried with early diabetes to manage with just diet and failed. That's why I got them. So I realized that there were reasons why some of these people were wanting to try, but they kept failing. My wife is a psychologist, so I had chats with her. And I thought, okay, I got to do some proper psychological grounding. Again, these were all online. The only one of real strength is that I became a master practitioner for neuro-linguistic programming, which was hard work. But I also did REBT, which is like CBT, and I got a diploma in applied psychology, again online, not big stuff. I then did a diploma online on diabetes reversal, so I thought I'd done enough things to put on my CV in just case somebody said, you call yourself a coach, what do you know? I've hated the word holistic medicine or practitioner in the past because the usual holistic practitioners are people who tell you, oh, okay, I can read your chakra, I'm a holistic practitioner. But I think I can now truly call myself holistic because, as you can see, I've done the rounds, I've done lots of learning. I now do lectures a lot to doctors, scientists, and lay audiences. I practice, okay, I better get a, yeah. I do a lot of medicine, nutritional, and health stuff. I have always been involved in conservation, so I do conservation lectures, and I belong to a group called the Kent Federation of Horticultural and Gardening Societies. There are over 200 societies linked together, and I'm one of the regular lecturers for various groups there. I also use AI a lot. I've always been nerdy, and I've been following AI, and over the last couple of years, I have seriously applied myself. And for those who recognize AI, I use multiple, you can see the icons. I now teach others in using AI, including doctors and medical groups. I train people, and my real joy is that I've been training my grandson, who is 12 years old, to use and build AI models to help him study. And I'm now starting to do some lectures on AI as well. Right, what am I going to talk about? Let's give you a little roadmap. I want to talk about how we as humans got to where we are. I want to tell you, I said the successful, so I want to tell you how we became successful. I want to talk about what some lecturers in my area call the biggest, longest clinical trial of all. I then want to tell you when things went wrong, what went wrong, and what I would call the worst mistake we made. There are lots and lots of mistakes. I want to talk primarily about what I specialize in, which is the diseases of civilization, in other words, metabolic disease, chronic metabolic disease. I want to talk about why that happened, and I want to talk about the roadmap, because I think I now have a roadmap which works so far very effectively in everybody I've tried to work with. So let's start with how we got here. Now, the Earth itself goes back over 4.5 billion years, which for many part of my life, billion was a number we couldn't quite imagine. But now we have two countries, India and China, both with over a billion population. But more to the point, we have people who now are billionaires. So we have begun to understand billion, which is a million millions. Life began about 3.5, 3.8 billion years ago. And it's important to realize that whatever DNA that started there helped to bring us where we are. And we have surprising amount of DNA which are just from long ago. Animals, we now come to about 500-600 million years ago. Now, if you look at a million being a billion, you can see that animal life is pretty recent in terms of geology. And even closer is that humans, we are somewhere between 300 to 4,000 years, which is very short time indeed, given that we have probably had a genetic evolution which goes back at least 200, 300 million years. We are carrying those genes. So if we look at this, on the left-hand side, that's when we got animals got spines, and then we came out of water. We started, if I bring out that's probably where we could say somewhere at between 40 to 60 million years ago, when the first thing that happened to our things we evolved from. That's when we think that we became able to become humans. Because what we did was from trees, we came down from trees, and we became the sort of creatures like monkeys without tails, who are the apes. If we look at earliest bipedal, that is very important, I'll talk about that. We then eventually evolved into Homo sapiens, which is at most about 300,000 years, so not a great deal of time. And again, keep in mind that most of our genes. I got a. Okay, where did that come? I'm getting an echo. Hold on. Sorry. I think. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, it's okay. I muted someone. Don't worry. Continue.
Because I started getting, I'm going to pause for a second just to get my top woke up from.
No, I think
I know what
that's okay. I muted someone. Yeah.
Okay. I got to warn you, my wife also does lots of work online. She's got a Zoom meeting on at the moment, so I might lose bandwidth on and off. So how did we become the most successful? We essentially came down from the trees. Coming down from the trees gave us two things. One is we could wander around. And second, we started walking on 2 feet. It wasn't long after that we started eating lots of meat. Meat was freely available if you came down from the trees, because there were a lot of predators who left behind extra meat. There were vultures and there were hyenas and all sorts of things, but we could chase them off. And then gradually, as we evolved, we also could kill our own meat. The one thing we did develop is long-distance running. We couldn't compete with most of the animals when it came to sprints. But if we were persistent, we could bring down something like a deer, because eventually the deer would tire before we did. So this was a great advantage we had, which is one of the key points in our evolution. If we now look at standing upright, was very, very important, because it gave us the ability to run, which is a very, very few animals can run the way we do. Some of the monkeys like lemurs, and they can do a tiny bit of running on 2 legs, but primarily we learned how to run basically falling and then putting another foot before we really fell down. And with that, we also lost our fur, which meant that we didn't overheat. So if we chased something, they would easily sprint faster, but we would follow them. And we kept following them and chasing them. And eventually, the prey we were chasing would tire and they would overheat. Or the carnivore who was chasing us, hopefully the same thing happened. Once we moved to that, we now had sources of very high energy foods. We became primarily carnivores with still ability to eat fruit and veg. But you had to remember that at the time that this happened, fruit was very rare and very few fruits were plump and juicy like they are now. And vegetable foods were very difficult to digest. They didn't have much nutrition. But harvesting animal products gave us a massive advantage to get more energy and wonderful nutrients. So our brain started to increase, and with the brain increasing, we could work together, we could plan things, we could make tools. So from that point on, we started developing some great advantages in our evolution. At the time, virtually all of the land was one big continent called we now call it Pangaea, which also meant that although we believe that the earliest human ancestor evolved in Africa, we were able to go all the way around to other countries. Our wonderful friend, Mr. Farage, was not there to stop people coming. ICE was not there to catch people and send them back. We didn't have planes and trains and cruise liners or Eurotunnels, but we could walk long distances. And that was our great advantage. We were great at doing mild to moderate exercises with short bursts of great activity. It wasn't long before we then went to every continent. We are the only large animal who has gone into every continent and settled. We went everywhere, including the Eskimos, the African tribes, all the way to Australia, North and South America, and we ate everything. So we could live with our specialized, mostly carnivorous omnivore, which is a specialization of its own because it made us so flexible that we could pretty much find food anywhere we went. The Inuit, the Eskimos, for example, they have pretty much no carbs at all until recently, and they were found to be incredibly healthy. In the early 1900s, an Arctic explorer called Stephenson went and spent a whole year with the Inuit. He came back and he said, I'm now healthier than I was when I went there. And all his friends said, yeah, you are. And he said, I had no vegetables or anything. I just ate meat and fat, basically whale and seal, fat and blubber. He, in fact, at the time, was so disbelieved by the medical community that he and a friend checked themselves into a New York hospital, and for a year, under observation from doctors, they lived only a carnivore diet, mimicking the Inuit diet. And at the end of it, the doctors publicly admitted that Stephenson and his friend were in fact healthier than the doctors who looked after him. So flexibility, eating everything, and now we were the only animal who could occupy, and we still are the only large animals who occupy every continent on Earth. Just have a sip of something, please. So on the left-hand side, it's this wonderful ability to eat almost anything, but whenever possible, eat as a carnivore. That gave us our biggest advantages. Curiously, records now show that a lot of the early game that we killed was what's called megafauna. In other words, we were killing large animals like buffaloes and elephants, and the elephant breed. It gave us lots of meat. The story of how they might have killed them is pretty horrible, but eventually we did get lots of meat. With the main meat came lots of animal fat. And we also ate everything. So we ate all the offal, the liver in particular. And we had some fish when we were next to a show. The animal offal was very important because if you look at the nutritional density, the vitamins, the minerals, liver is at the top of everything. So if you can eat liver, you can pretty much, with some meat, you can do brilliantly. You need fat, but fat, interestingly, comes quite freely with meat. You don't have to go looking for fat. Throughout our evolution, including today, the one macronutrient, the essential, we don't need is carbohydrates. And there have now been studies following groups of pure carnivores, humans, who have now been carnivore for more than 10 years. and they have been studied extensively, and they're very healthy. But we know that there are essential proteins, amino acids, and we know that there are essential fats, which we can't produce in our body, and therefore, if we didn't have those, we would usually slowly, sicken and die. We genuinely don't need any carbohydrates. It's nice to get some glucose because although most organs can survive very healthily on fat, the brain requires possibly up to 40% of glucose to survive and be very energetic. And if you're doing things like sprints, muscles do better using glucose than using fat. But the liver can convert, first of all, the fats, and then if necessary, if you're really starving, some of the proteins as well. Gluconeogenesis, the liver can produce all the glucose we need. So we can live without any carbs at all. But as we evolved as a successful omnivore, we also learned on this half to live on some fruit and veg. It's quite clear from looking at archaeology and looking at paleontology and looking at modern ancestral tribesmen that the men pretty much ate the meat. And what's left over was left for the wives and children. So men didn't have that much non-meat food, but we were able to survive, especially if it was a time of difficulty in getting game. But it's important to remember that what we ate as veggies and fruits were very much low density nutrients and difficult to release those. We had to pound and break stuff. We learned how to use fire, which was a big advantage. So essentially, we continued the journey as mostly carnivorous omnivores. Now I come to the thing that we are beginning to call the longest and greatest health study that's ever been done. And sadly, this was pretty much ignored by everybody because we never thought of thinking of it as a health study, although we had all the information. And sadly, as a doctor, what becomes quite clear when somebody points it out now, shamefully, we didn't really notice. Let's take diabetes itself. This is 100 years, starting at 1924. Now, I use it for people who are scientists or who understand. I use a thing called Z score, which is the number of standard deviations, which means that you can mix different types of data together and plot it on the same graph. So, for example, to use the classic phase, we can look at apples and pears and compare them. So if I look at Z scores, something magical starts to appear. This goes back 100 years. There was diabetes at 100 years. But somewhere around here, 1980, something happened to the world and diabetes started to climb. If we put obesity on that graph, you can see again, obesity started even a little bit earlier than diabetes. So whatever happened to cause obesity, either obesity directly contributed or the same condition sort of began with people getting a bit plumper and fatter, mostly, and then becoming diabetic. You stick in hypertension. Took a bit longer for people to become hypertensive, but it happened. Again, there are the magic area somewhere here and there where there is what we would call an inflection point, where the graph starts to change. And interestingly, for us at our age, Alzheimer's disease follows the same curve, and so much so that many of us in the nutritional field are now freely calling Alzheimer's, and this is in publications as well, as diabetes type 3. One of the things I get all the time is people say, oh, but we now live longer, so you can't say that we are less healthy or whatever. Now, this is men by age, and we are going back. On the left-hand side, you can see the sort of reddish area is the data from 1950, and the blue area is from 2025. Now, yes, you could look at that and say, oh, there is a definite difference. We are living longer, aren't we? Sort of. You must remember that if you look at the 1950, lots of infants, lots of children were dying. So that skewed the graph quite a lot and pulled the pink areas down a bit because we are looking at things like averages and standard deviations. If we now look at the same thing, but we take away mortality, especially in infancy and childhood, we start the graph from people who had lived beyond 30 years, you can see that the graphs come closer together. You also need to understand that the peaks of the graphs are, we are talking about averages. We're talking about the mean. The mean is not great because if you look, for example, if you look at how much people earn in America, you think it's pretty good until you get the billionaires out, because that skews the graphs. And the latest data come out this year show that the average American, with the billionaires taken out, are actually poorer than the average Brit or the average European. They have much less money than us. They are really, some of them are in very impoverished conditions, but the billionaires pull the graphs. If we look at, instead we look at the median, which is where do most people appear, that's now interesting because the medians are very close to each other, especially if you look at the graph on the left. But if you take away infant mortality, the medians, you can see that's 50% of the populations for the two graphs. And that's 50% has come even closer together. So the gap between what we would like to say we live longer and what we were 1950 is skewed by infant mortality and the fact that we keep looking at means and not medians, which is what is important, because a few hundred arrows can skew the graph. So the death spikes are actually coming closer together. Now, this is going back to means, so we are now seeing a big difference between the 1900s, 1950s, and 2025s. But what this shows is not just the average lifespan or health span, but what is also your ill span. How many years are you ill before you die? And you can see that in the 1900s, although even the means were not as great, people were mostly healthy till closer to death. The average sick span was 3.5 years. By the 1950s, it had grown to 10, tripled, sorry. So we were spending more time being sick towards the end of our life. And when we look at last year's data, 4 times as long being sick as we were before we died compared to the 1900. And that is a big problem because we are very proud of everything. We are proud of our medicine. We are proud of technological advantages. We are proud of all our doctors and nurses and hospitals and the money we throw. But really, we are buying time living longer as sick people. This is country by country on recent data. The Japanese are now beating the rest of the world. They, on average, live to 86 years, pretty good. Their sick years are still significant, but compared to the fact that they have gone to a much longer time, their sick years are in fact a tiny bit less than the next group, which is Spain, Italy, and France. Until recently, we have not looked up to these people, but they have a different sort of lifestyle. Not necessarily that they eat nicer food. I mean, look at the Italians with all the pasta, and look at the French who'll spend 2-3 hours having a meal and drinking wine. We are down here, sadly, just under Greece, which is a dreadful thing, given how much troubles the Greeks have gone through. But we can at least say, okay, we are better than Germany. Makes us always happy to say we are better than Germany at some time. And we can also turn around and say, oh, we are so much better than the USA. India at the moment comes quite far down. I'm reluctant to include data from China because we know that the state has a lot of influence on data released in China. So when did all these things happen? When did we go wrong? This is quite interesting because we are going back to 1066, the Norman invasion. Sorry, since my bit of brain damage and brain surgery, I sometimes stumble on words, and I think I just did that maybe before. So if I stumble on a word, it's because I got bits still not, well, probably won't heal again inside my brain. So if you go back to 1066 and we look at a population, which is not great, and it rose very, very gently until about 1348 on this graph, and then Black Death came to the world and killed more people. But can you see the inflection point? The agricultural revolution. And then quickly followed by the industrial revolution. At that point, our population started booming. They really started to increase because we were able to grow more food. We are talking about growing more food, which is unfortunately primarily growing and feeding on more carbs. So much so that if you look at, remember this graph is broken. I've shown you a little bit of a break here because you can't draw the same thing to scale right across. 2.5 million years ago, we had a sort of a Paleolithic diet, which is mostly carnivore with some veggies and fruits. We shifted at the Neolithic time when we started growing stuff, and then we hit agricultural and industrial revolution, and that's when it follows the same sort of massive change, and this is because we started being able to feed more and more people and suddenly started to go from millions population into the billions. This is one of my heroes, he's Jared Diamond, written some wonderful books. And controversially, some years ago, he said the worst mistake humans made was the agricultural and industrial revolutions. So what went wrong? Here we go. We peaked in fitness and health probably somewhere when we were there, and now we have gone down. We no longer have to hunt for food, we can click for food. One thing people haven't understood till recently, and very few people still do, is that the muscle is the biggest metabolic organ in the human body, and we have neglected it. So when we become less muscular, it's just not the fact that we can't run as fast and do stuff like that, but it's the fact that we can't cope with our carbs, which is primarily the problem. And then we have the new attitude of pretty much sedentary behavior in many people, so much so that people now say sitting is the new smoking, but with better snacks and worse complications. On the left-hand side is what it would be called loosely a paleo diet, which was mostly meat-based with some poorly nutritious nuts and fruits and vegetables. On the right-hand side, we have the agricultural and industrial revolutions, which meant that our nutrition then changed more to carbs. And if you have DNA, which goes back millions of years, and our change to high carb came in the 1850s, it's not surprising at all that our bodies, our nutrition, our metabolism cannot cope with high carb food. On the left-hand side, we have been doing it for 2.5 million years. On the right-hand side, we have been doing it for about 10,000 years. So not great. In fact, our paleotype diet might even go all the way back to over 6 million years ago. So our genetics, our DNA, and all our systems might be not much different from that of 6.5 million years ago. So we have gone from the greatest species to this with all the medicines, but we don't get too alarmed because a lot of us look like that for many years of our life. Although the new data from the USA shows that 95%, that's a hell of a lot, 95% of Americans, if they're tested for metabolic syndrome, they're positive. But because we don't test people for metabolic syndrome, our standard tests in the NHS in the countries don't allow us to test for metabolic syndrome. We don't know we are carrying these time bombs. And now our new understanding of the metabolic syndrome shows that before we get things like diabetes or even sometimes obesity, the metabolic syndrome has been present in athletic-looking, young, fit, healthy-looking people for 20 years. So what we used to call pre-diabetes is quite a misnomer because pre-diabetes is a short period. We used to call some things hidden diabetes. And in my time, although I was an eye surgeon, I was very heavily involved in diabetic medicine. I used to lecture on diabetic medicine. We used to say that you probably have some hidden diabetes, but the so-called hidden diabetes, which we would now call metabolic syndrome, precedes diabetes by about 20 years. And the problem is the food we are getting thrown in has changed not only to being high carb, but it's now being engineered. A lot of the food that you can buy in supermarkets, the quick meals, there are scientists working behind the scenes who are paid to come up with hyperpalatability, foods which tickle our appreciation of what is lovely and great to eat, rather than what is good for us to eat. These have also hijacked our brains. And interestingly, the scientists who have been working on hyperpalatability have also looked at addictive behavior, wanting to eat more food, which is not surprising because when we managed to fight the battle against smoking, which took us 50 years, a hell of a lot of time, from the time that people started saying smoking is bad till we got to the point where we managed to deal with most of the smoking problems, 40% of the scientists who worked in the cigarette industry, hooking people onto cigarettes, including showing wonderful adverts with doctors smoking the special brands, they have now hijacked our pleasure centers. We now have addiction to bad food. And because we have damaged our systems, we don't know when we have eaten enough. Satiety is a signal there are no fat animals in the wild. Some animals get a bit fat towards the end of season because they're going into hibernation, but you don't get fat leopards, you don't get fat lions, they won't be able to chase the deer, you don't get fat deer because they won't be able to get away from the lions and the leopards and whatever. Animals, when they eat enough, they leave the rest behind. And you'd have all seen wonderful pictures of a whole lot of lions happily lying in the sun around the carcass of a dead animal. And you would see deer walking quite close to them because the deer know that the lions have had their fill. We are pretty much the only species that we haven't wrecked. We can have fat dogs and cats because we are wrecking them. But if you compare to wild animals, we are the only species who are not stopped when we eat enough. Our systems were devised to use multiple sources of energy, and for a very, very long time, and when it comes to our generation, probably from the time infants survive on fats. They don't get much carbs from the mother. But from that time on, we live on carbs, so we live on essentially glucose metabolism. And although the glucose metabolism is very useful and we should have it running because, as I said before, the brain needs some. And also, if you do things like sprinting and sudden fast movements, glucose is a better source of energy than what we should be doing, which is actually running on fat. Because we evolved to run on fat. More and more people are recognizing this. This is coming out in more and more of the studies. In fact, if you look at the ratio of clinical evidence coming through, we now find, for example, that for about every 100 papers coming out, there'll be one reluctant paper trying to get us back on anti-fat, particularly anti-animal fat. So ketones are the best energy source for human beings, and we should be running on ketones through fat burning. And it's important for doctors to realize this is not ketoacidosis, which is an entirely different thing. Metabolic ketosis doesn't make you ketoacidotic. The only things that make you ketoacidotic, if you are a type 1 diabetic who's not on management, or you are actually been starving because you are in a concentration camp in the wars or something similar. You can't really get ketoacidosis until you start burning your muscles, and that pretty much doesn't happen. So when people panic and say, oh, ketoacidosis, we are not talking about that. We are talking about metabolic ketosis. There's been a lot of stuff about fructose, sorry. We went through a whole cycle when people said, oh, that's the natural sugar, we should have more of it. But you can't burn fructose, most of it, through the glucose pathway. Unfortunately, if you have too much fructose, it is poisonous because it produces, among other things, far too much uric acid, which causes lots of problems, not just gout. It causes a lot of poisoning, including poisoning our mitochondria, which is one of the big problems in modern health. And for those of us who fluctuated between saying, okay, no alcohol, some alcohol, red wine is great. Scientists have found resveratrol, it's very good for you. The problem is alcohol uses an entirely different pathway. If you want to get your resveratrol through drinking red wine, you would have to become alcoholic. Sorry, just a reminder that I'm getting along. Oh, stop. Okay, so short of becoming alcoholic, don't try to get your resveratrol through alcohol. If you're really keen on it, have some tablets. We have now destroyed our systems because we are multi-energy burning, and we should be burning like the hybrid car on the right side. We should be running on electricity with the backup of petrol. Instead, pretty much all our lives at our generation and our children's generation and most of our grandchildren maybe, we have been overloading on carbs, converting it to fat and storing the fat. It's a bit like having a hybrid car on the left-hand side, but we keep going to the petrol station first thing in the morning, and even if the petrol tank is virtually full, we demand that we get more petrol stores and we fill these little containers. And the man in the garage says, but you don't need any more. And we say, no, we have to have petrol. And what then happens is fat should be only for insurance. It should only be for bad times. Instead, we are storing more and more and more. Insulin is the trigger, and we've got to recognize what insulin does. Because if insulin is present, excess carbs and fats are stored as fats. If you don't produce insulin, which means if you have low carb, you produce less insulin or hardly any, then even if you have lots of fat, that fat cannot be stored as more fat. So much so that some nutritionists now say eat fat to lose fat. We got this system of storage when food could be difficult to get by at some time. So we have a way of keeping some reserve today we have been growing up, and certainly if I put myself and most of you, we have been adding to this reserve non-stop from the time we stopped growing. Because until then, we were often very slim and nice looking because we used insulin to take glucose and carbs and use it up. But since we stopped growing, insulin has worked against us. On the left-hand side is what happens if we live on a carb high or glucose high in humans, because glucose itself is a poison. One of the main problems with body inflammation we recognize is called advanced glycated end products, or AGE, which is a nice abbreviation because age does ages. It damages all the systems. On the right-hand side, we see it's like a car which is running on non-petrol, non-diesel. Our equivalent is that we are adapted to getting most of our energy on fat, and we live on fat. This is also what we are grown up to in closer time. For example, breakfast is the most important meal. You all heard that. And when people questioned it, we were told, and as a doctor, I would say, oh, Harvard professor and medical team said it's important. The reality was, the Harvard professor and his team were funded by Kellogg's. You're used to being told how to read labels. This is actually from a true incident because I was talking to one of my cousins who is a professor of physiology in Cambridge, animal physiology. But he told me this is his breakfast. He has heart-friendly oats with some low-fat milk and a glass of apple juice. It came out with 22 grams of total carbs per 100 grams, which doesn't sound too bad. 6 grams of sugar in it, which sounds really encouraging, with 4 grams of fiber. Okay, expected more, but that's still pretty good. The problem is that people forget that almost all carbohydrates are actually glucose molecules which have been linked together. So it's as good as glucose, except for the fiber, which are carbs which can't be digested into glucose. So if we ignore the line which says so many grams of sugar, and we just remove the fiber, which is good stuff, from the carbs, we now end up with 16 grams of glucose. Not only would we not be keen to eat 16 grams, but if we know that every 4 grams of that is in fact a teaspoon of sugar, then we are actually having this breakfast, 4 teaspoons of sugar every day, the healthy breakfast that many of us have been told to do. On the left-hand side is the metabolically healthy foods, which we evolved from. On the right-hand side is what we now feed ourselves and fed our children, and they and us are probably still feeding our grandchildren. 1980, we come back to the graph. What happened there? Dietary guidelines started to appear. They pushed towards high carb, healthy grains, high fructose corn syrup, because the American corn industry is so heavily subsidized that they can use corn for producing many, many things, including corn sugar, which is expensive to produce compared to, say, beet sugar or sugar cane, actually is sold much, much cheaper. So if you look at many, many products, they have high fructose, and we spoke about the danger of fructose. Corn syrup has replaced many things. And that's what happened, the reverse of our wonderful graph where we survived, and then suddenly towards 1980s, the music stopped. The first American guidelines for nutrition, American, I forgot the exact abbreviation, was published in 1980. Soon after followed by the American Cardiac Association, 84. Sadly, nobody questioned it. And very soon, these guidelines were adapted by Europe, UK, and most of the world. So what is the worst mistake? If you had to pick up one worst mistake, it was this. In the 1980s, we created this wonderful food pyramid, and it went on all the way till late 2025. And if you look at this, here we are. This is the thing to eat, 6 to 11 servings of grains, carbohydrates, whole grains, fruit and nut. Okay, eat some of that. Meat, eggs, nuts, dairy products have much less, and oils and fats and sweets use little, but a big problem there as well, because we were told things like butter are very bad, whereas seed oils like corn oil and canola oil and vegetable oils of sunflower oil, they are healthy. And we should have, and that's why I say, and people are saying, that we ignored the graphs which showed us that for many, many years, our poor patients, people who listen to us, have been doing this. But our health has worsened from about the 80s onwards. And because we can trace back many of the changes to the agricultural and industrial revolutions, in the lecture space, a lot of us are using the word the diseases of civilization. And this is our current understanding of some of the problems which are strongly associated with the metabolic syndrome, which I'll remind you starts about 20 years before you get diabetes or obesity. A lot of hypertension, not all of it, a lot of it is related to metabolic syndrome or diabetes, which is caused by the metabolic syndrome. I mentioned that Alzheimer's is we are calling it diabetes type 3 because that is seen as so strongly linked. Erectile dysfunction and polycystic ovarian disease, probably the commonest cause of infertility in humans, comes from the metabolic syndrome. Liver disease, large numbers of us have fatty liver disease. We don't notice it because we don't look for it. But when we look for it, the Americans did try some scanning, and they found 60% of Americans over the age of 20 already had fatty liver disease, kidney disease, enormous linkages to cancer, whether you get cancer or not, but also how long you live after you get cancer. Because we have now gone back to something we have ignored called the Wardenberg phenomenon, where we now understand that most cancer cells need glucose to survive because they have a very primitive system for getting energy from glucose. Whereas we can live without glucose, without carbs, and if you go to very low carb, then your cancer cells become weaker and quite often your body can overcome cancer. Parkinson's disease, neurodegenerative disease, including ALS. There are some remarkable new studies coming out. Brain energy, mitochondrial damage causing problems, ADHD, anxiety, depression. So much so that that's one of the reasons why I branched off into getting some knowledge in psychology, because you need that to understand what diet could do to these conditions. And people who are on massive treatments, multiple drugs, or some of them, not all of them, but some of them are coming off their medications just by going into low-carb diets. Even things like bipolar and schizophrenia, there are multiple psychologists and psychiatrists especially who have converted from drug treating these conditions, and they are talking about a new specialty called nutritional psychiatrists. If you look at the costs of metabolic disease, these are obviously estimated. 20 million deaths from cardiac disease every year, where metabolic disease is the underlying cause, high blood pressure, diabetes, obesity-related disease, all liver disease, all these things are linked to the metabolic syndrome. If we look at death, now we have got to compare against the old days, but if you look at the Black Death, it killed about 75 million people, but over 4 to 7 years. look at World War I, 15 to 22 millions, but over 4 years. COVID killed off 15 to 28 million, but, millions, yep, over 3 years. Even World War II, 70 to 85,000 took 6 years, whereas our projected figures now for every year is 25 to 30 million deaths associated with the metabolic syndrome. If you look at diabetes as one example, we have 5.8 million UK, 590 million globally. We spend in the UK 150 odd trillion, in the world, and at least 10 billion in the NHS. Doubles the risk of heart attacks and strokes, primary cause of blindness and kidney failure, strongest association with liver disease, one of the strongest associations with Alzheimer's, but also with some other forms of dementia. And sadly, there's health inequality, so that Asian and Black populations are more prone to the disease and sometimes less able to get treatment in some parts of the world. So all these conditions, we can achieve some degree of remission, which is getting rid of it completely, or reversal, where we make it not progress, through intensive lifestyle changing. And I stress lifestyle because this is not mad diets. So all of these conditions, we need to know why we are in this situation. This is why we are primarily in this situation. Okay, agriculture revolution didn't help, but we now have massive blocks of big pharma and big agriculture, primarily through multinationals and the United States, who are encouraging us to become this lovely man in the middle. And you can see the big friendly uncles who are helping us to become like this. Now, actually what they're doing is, you can see the expressions have changed because they're just picking our pockets. Now, this is an interesting thing for those of you who are interested in AI. There's something wrong with this picture because AIs can be fallible and you've got to be really, really careful. When I told the AI to convert the previous picture into one where they're picking the pockets, we ended up with an extra hand. So there is too many hands in this picture. I left it there because people who start using AI have to be aware that AIs can have many problems. You have to be careful. Who lied to us? Well, many people have lied to us, but this was one of the big problems. On the left-hand side is what are called K rations, which were produced for World War II for the American Army. Now, the guy who devised it was a person called Ansel Adams, who was an economist and a rat physiologist, but he was very, very well connected, and he, from all accounts, was very good at talking people into doing things and fighting off people who disagreed. In the 1950s, he visited Europe and produced this extraordinarily great graph called the 7 Nations graph, which shows the relationship between fat calories and deaths per 1,000. And you can see that starting from Japan going all the way to the top to the US, there's such a very strong link, even when you look at people younger than 50. He featured in Time magazine, he became very famous, he got into all the committees. The problem was, when he came for this data in Europe, he got all that data. But he then chose the ones which fitted his graph and didn't show the others. And although there were a few scientists who recognized this, they were shouted down. That was Ansel Adams. Now, some years ago, we had what's called the blue zones. These are little zones around the world where more people live to be over 100 per 100,000 population. And we identified these 5 zones. The longest living were, in terms of the most over 100 were in Okinawa in Japan. The highest number over 90 was in a Greek island, Icaria. Sardinia had the highest male centenarians. The largest middle-age mortality was a place in Costa Rica called the Nicoya. And there was Loma Linda in California. Now, Loma Linda actually didn't fit. There are other places where there were more, over hundreds. But the studies were done by Americans, and they were told that they would have to get funding. They had to include at least one place. And by this time, the Seventh-day Adventists in California, in Loma Linda, had become very powerful and very rich. So they funded the studies that went on to talk about this condition. The Seventh-day Adventists started with a lady called Ellen G. White, who, when she was in, I'm not sure, I can't remember if it was late teens or a bit older, she dreamt that God visited her in her dreams and said that men, when they eat meat, they have bad thoughts. They start thinking about sex and they start masturbating. So to prevent the children masturbating, the boys, and to prevent men having bad thoughts, she started the Seventh-day Adventist movement, which has now become a massively important movement. But they agreed to put a lot of funds into this blue zone study because the people who funded it thought that we are going to find that these people, all those little communities, lived primarily on vegetarian, plant-based food. Loma Linda is essentially totally vegetarian. This was one of my heroes who did the study, went around all these countries some years ago. He produced TV programs, books, recipe books, a man called Dan Buettner. Sadly, I have to now recognize that, in fact, he was conned. Well, so we made the discovery. Dan Buettner trademarked the blue zones in 2005. Loma Linda was added because of the Americans. We said that meat and large, we ignored the fact that those people were eating it. We started producing books and packages. Seventh-day Adventists bought the Blue Zone franchise in 2020. They spent all their money producing plant-based diet, and they started influencing people, doctors and healthcare, and Blue Zone has expanded and expanded. And in a lot of America, you can get packaged foods which are certified Blue Zone. So I've had to change my lectures about the Blue Zones. Okay, microbiome. I have been talking about microbiomes. I've done lectures on microbiomes. 2027, I'm booked to do a whole day of microbiome lectures, one after the other, for a large group of scientists and retired scientists called the U3A group of the Southwest. But over the last year, knowledge about this is changing. So the knowledge that I've been preaching last year was all about eating lots of veggies and fruits, and that it helps digestion, immunity, gut flora, inflammation, digestion, absorption, immunity, that we have trillions of microbes who are waiting there, friendly bacteria waiting to convert all this to good food. And we were told things like 5 a day, and even eat the rainbow, because we know that colored fruits and vegetables have polyphenols, which at least in laboratories, but to some extent in life, have benefits. We now know that, in fact, despite the fact that here is another great hero of mine, Professor Tim Spector, the book on the left, I bought that when he published it. I was so amazed by it. It changed a lot of my thinking. He's published a lot more, been on TV, he's quite famous. But when he set up the organization called Zoe, which some of you might be aware, Zoe became a money spinner, but he therefore has become very reluctant to say that what he was preaching 2 years ago has changed. So another person who has fooled me, feet of clay, not moving on. The big problem we have is that we as doctors are vested. Our way of life is vested. So much so that many people are saying doctors are not practitioners of health, that we are practitioners of ill health. If we sort out metabolic syndrome in the world today, within 5 to 10 years, all these professionals, among many others, GPs, nurses, a lot of us would not have jobs because there wouldn't be enough patients in these categories. And if we are right in about what we believe, people will die. They will always die. So far, we haven't sorted that out. But people will live healthier and die with shorter poor health spans, which will mean we don't need that much doctoring. So last spell, we are on the long road back. This was a horrible meme that I think is responsible for so much bad health, the pre-2025 food pyramid. Last year, wonderful, they just flipped it upside down. They finally had to give in. And we now have all the bad things at the top: meat, fish, animal fats, eggs, olive oil, avocados, yogurt. Fermented foods are very good. And also we have got, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. And also we got dairy products. And we have in the middle fruit and veg. And right at the bottom now, since 2025 December, the American Dietary Association advice, everything says, you got to limit your whole grains. And we know that people are living happily as carnivores. A lot of our beliefs in food, medicine, nutrition, sadly, has been run from here, Congress. And Congress has been run on money. And money on the left-hand side for a long time came from the grain industry and soybeans, corns, canolas, and livestock feeding. Last year, things changed. And although I'm so excited by the inverted food pyramid, we now know that a majority of that was not because of science, but because on the right hand, the meat industry became more powerful in the last few years. So they have a big influence on Congress. They are sending more money to Congress. But whatever the cause, it doesn't matter. We have finally found that the food pyramid looks like what it should. So we started as active hunter-gatherers who were very healthy. We spent a lot of our time, even going up to the early 1900s, as pretty healthy. Then we became the next block along, and we need to now go to the right-hand edge. So here's the new formula. If we start at the top, we are eating too many hours of the day. We were never meant to do that. And the most powerful way to get back to good health is intermittent fasting, reducing the number of hours we eat in a day and increasing the number of hours we fast. And that's one of the things I teach very strongly. Ketosis, burning fats for most of our energy rather than glucose, massively important. And that is something you have to take some time doing. It's not an overnight thing, but it is not giving up all nice food, because ketosis means you can have things like nice steaks and fish, and even vegetarians, there are ways to become ketotic. We have to learn to let our bodies repair ourselves. One of the biggest causes of things like cancer and body inflammation leading to a whole lot of different things, including arthritic conditions. We have not got enough repair time. Autophagy, recycling, apoptosis, sick cells killing themselves for the good of the cause. Mitophagy, mitochondria, enormously important for the body. They are getting time to rest and they have time to be replaced. Muscles on the left-hand side, we now know the importance of muscle, not just for running around and creating records or showing off how big our muscles are. It is a metabolical, excuse me, I need a drink. It is the biggest metabolic organ in the body. We need to get them running. And from the age of about 40, we lose muscles naturally. And then obviously we live in toxins. We have got to reduce the toxins, learn how to not eat toxins, and we have got to try to detoxify because we already got the effects of toxins. You finished the long run. Now you're coming back to me. You know why I became a health coach? I've sort of talked about things all of you can do, and since the majority of the audience are doctors, there's nothing to stop you going through the evidence, looking at videos, textbooks, lots of sources these days, multimedia, and doing the same journey. But I teach coaching for nutrition. The biggest bang for buck, what gets you most, is intermittent fasting. Metabolic ketosis linked to low carb, high fat is very important. Mild to moderate exercise. We actually now know that strenuous exercise is not good for the human body. It's great if you want to set records or your career depends on it, but mild to moderate is what keeps you healthy with short bursts of like sprinting. Natural foods. Eat foods which look like what foods would have been. Give up eating all processed foods because they were engineered. Seed oils, really bad for us. Reduce the toxins. Build up a healthy microbiome, but this is changing. Understand what causes cancer, because we have just gone to a point of saying cancers are caused by living long enough to get cancer. Then we said cancer is a genetic disease. You can't do much about it. But we now know that you can delay cancers or even prevent them, and you can also give cancer people more years of life by going into metabolic ketosis. And this is something which is increasingly becoming important. Mindfulness and stress reduction. I'm glad I was into it for many years, but now I have studied it further, and all my clients are taught how to use mindfulness. And certainly when it comes to hypertension, although many of the hypertensives are related to metabolic syndrome, just like myself, you can stop being hypertensive by adding mindfulness, stress reduction to our lifestyle. Now, this is something which is really interesting. Jessie Inchauspé is a French biochemist. She became known as the glucose goddess because of her Instagram, which went to millions, and she has become, I believe, millionaire through her. But what she said is very interesting, because what she was pushing is not to worry too much about dieting or exercise or do anything like that, but there are hacks, there are biohacks that you can do to start reducing weight and perhaps reduce diabetes and things. And the thing is that the science backs her up. She talks about the 10 hacks. And I strongly recommend that if you do nothing else, you want to stick with your bad diet, you don't want to do heavy exercising, learn what to do. She has been on TV and she has books, and you can get lots of YouTube videos. First step, I very strongly ban all my clients from counting calories. There are many reasons for that, which I don't have time. Reduce sugar intake. Those two are very important. She is okay with allowing people to continue to eat breakfast, but to switch to savory breakfast, to give up your heart-healthy grains. As I told you, they are not healthy. Give up your morning glass of fruit juice. That's not healthy. If you want to stay with breakfast, although I try to get people off breakfast because breakfast is not the most important. And if you want to have more fasting time, it's the easier thing to do is to push breakfast down into a brunch. And if you have cooked breakfast and she'll give you lists of things which are good for you, that genuinely helps with glucose spikes and helps you with diabetes. She has publicized this thing called the correct food order, where you eat your salads, veggie starters, then you eat your main. Only have sweet foods as a part of dessert after your main meal. Never have it as snacks. And this is really fascinating because this has come through. Multiple studies have supported this. Just 10 minutes after you eat a meal, if you do something which is movement, we're not talking about running or lifting weights. Weather is getting better. If you just go for a walk outside, you walk out of your house for 5 minutes, you come back home, another 5 minutes, you will start the cycle. The two things that she has publicized, one is the thing called the vinegar hack, drinking a tablespoon of vinegar in a glass full of water, anything from half an hour to an hour before your main meal. Acetic acid reduces glucose absorption, so it has a massive impact. And what she calls clothing your carbs, in other words, never eat pure carbs, always have fiber and fat if you can before you eat your carbs. And if you search for continuous glucose monitoring on Google Images, you'll see the difference where you have the same breakfast, but one breakfast you have even more because you're eating more butter, or you had an avocado on top of the same breakfast on the two sides, you absorb glucose less and you spike less. So if you do nothing from this lecture at all, look at this, because this is the easiest thing to do to start you on a better health journey. I also have introduced Japanese style of good health. They've gone back to tradition. I showed you on the graph that they have probably the best health as a nation. Traditional balanced meals, lots of vegetables, soy products, and green tea. I don't have time to go into this. They have this wonderful thing they teach children all the way from kindergarten up to, it's called Harahichi Banmei, which is 80% full. You stop eating at 80%. If you wait a little bit, your body catches up and says, actually, I am full. And they teach that from school onwards. Low sugar, fresh seasonal, and mindful eating. Value food, take your time eating. Lifestyle, they don't advocate going for massive weightlifting or things, just urban daily movements. When you come to exercise, gardening is brilliant. I get all my clients now to do Tai Chi because it is not the old Tai Chi, which was a martial art, but the new Tai Chi or Chibang, is that what they call Qigong, sorry, which is all about movement. Japan has a wonderful healthcare system. We have a pretty good one, although it's not great. But the other thing which came out of all healthiness is that having groups, social connections, and there are lots of studies, and the biggest single thing that came out of the blue zones was that they all had social connections. So it's a good thing Sri Lankans actually have connections. The big problem I have, this is Mark Twain, another of my heroes. It's easier to fool somebody than convince them that they had been fooled. And I face this all the time. My psychologist wife reminds me that we call it cognitive dissonance. Two people can hear the same things, they hear different things. And this is one of the reasons that I have put so much psychology learning into my thing. So if we go through what I would call my credentials, I have my medicine, my psychology. I can do CBT style stuff with people who are struggling. I can do psychotherapeutics with my master practitioner for neuro-linguistic programming. I strongly teach mindfulness. I use my quality assurance training from Six Sigma, which I had from hospitals, because I like to make sure that I'm doing things the most effectively. I haven't quite yet found bioengineering helping much, although I strongly support things like continuous glucose monitors. And this sort of means these are the things I generally manage. Weight loss, dead easy for me. People lose weight if they stay with me. And we are talking about starting weight loss very healthily within about 3 months and being well established by 6, and without crazy dieting. So far, I have managed to reverse all of my diabetic patients, including one who had liver disease. I'm reversing a lot of hypertension. Some people are coming off treatment or their blood pressures are getting better. As I said, I did manage to get one non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. That's the only person who I've had so far. Cholesterol is a big problem because we have been misinformed so much, but if you call it dyslipidemia, then yes, we can do it. Mental well-being, I got some remarkable stories of some of my clients who have massively changed in their well-being. And very important, reducing future risk, reducing not only things like diabetes and hypertension, but brain problems, ADHD, anxiety, cancers. I strongly believe, and I'm beginning to see some of these, although the ones which are preventative, I will not see for a long time. If you look on the left, unfortunately, for the reason on the right, I can't have any one-to-one coaching, and I can't do any lectures and talks except Wednesdays and Fridays through the cricket season, because I tend to play 4 to 5 games of cricket every week. So what can I offer? If anybody wants to work with me towards better health, I'm very welcoming. You had to commit to a 6-month. I don't mean like every damn day of it and every hour of it, but I don't believe in quick. It takes 6 months anyway to change most habits. So 6 months is a good spell. People need to agree to meet with me online or face-to-face twice a month. Group works better for many reasons, but also because I don't have time to do individual now, but groups actually progress faster when they have people working with them. 6 to 10 per group. I don't have time to fit people in and look after them. So each group will have to start with the coordinator who runs the group. The group should ideally meet once a month face-to-face, even if I'm not there and I'm on Zoom. But if you can't, then twice a month by Zoom or whatever system we use. Even WhatsApp works very well. And people who have already got diseases like diabetes and hypertension, I need to speak to them one-to-one. I won't do that in the group between meetings. I will not spend any time trying to convince you to join. I don't have time for that. I only want people who think they would want to give it a try and they're willing to give it a try because they recognize that we are not living well. We are getting diabetic, we are getting overweight, and we have got cancers and Alzheimer's. My cricket group, I play for the over 70s and over 60s. Almost every year we lose 3 to 4 players, and they're all almost always cancer. So I'm not going to debate with you either because I have very little time, and I'll prefer to have people who already are willing to come and give it a try. I will not chase you for missing meetings. My first meeting is always free, but after that you have to pay before the meeting and it's non-refundable. I offer lots of discounted, I don't charge anything like what I would for a health coach in London. And I have loyalty schemes. If you go beyond 3 months, then I will often reduce your fees. Encourage. You have to spend a bit more. For example, if you're diabetic, you will have to at some stage start wearing a continuous glucose monitor. Give me permission to see day by day what's happening to you, hour by hour, so that I can look after you. You may need to buy some books, especially recipe books, to help you with keto and so on. But it's not massive. I'm pretty cheap. Some people give me less money than I give my gardener per hour. I hope you survived that. I hope you called the ambulance in time. Thank you for listening. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Dilo. Can you unshare your presentation, please, so that we could see everybody?
Okay, let me just work out how to do that again. Go to Zoom.
That's it. If you switch it off.
Is that the one? Screen share.
Yeah.
Did it happen?
Not yet.
Top share. Okay, I found a red. Are we there?
That's fine. Yes, that's it.
Fantastic.
Wonderful. So, time to ask some questions from Dilo.
Please don't ask me to prove anything. It's a massive amount of knowledge that I distilled. And most of you are doctors. You're very able to learn and understand massive amounts of knowledge.
Right. We got the first question from Dr. Satyarinagam. Sati.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ruan. And also thank you, Dilo, for that insightful account of your experiences and your research. If I may commence with a very generic question.
Of course.
I totally agree with you. I mean, having been a general practitioner many years ago, before I went into hospital practice, I did have a lot of indoctrination about health beliefs and behavioral changes. And I think you have highlighted that. My question is, now, from your experience, I'm not challenging you, but I'm just trying to be factual, to extract some information from you. What was the kind of success rate that you achieved through your health coaching when it comes to behavioral changes?
Well, I'll remind you that I've really been in this. If I add my own getting better, it goes to about 2 years, but a lot of this goes to a year. I'm primarily based on all the wonderful knowledge that's coming through. Two of the leading centers for diabetic control through primarily from low carb, high fat diets is in the UK base, and they are world-renowned centers. Many nephrologists, diabetologists, psychiatrists, oncologists are changing to low carb, high fat diets. That's what I said. It's my experience is not enough people to be scientific. So far, I've not had a failure, but I spend a lot of time with my clients. All I can say is that I will experience failure. I'm not foolish enough to think I will cure everybody, but that's not scientific because I don't have the numbers. But the numbers are there. There are studies with putting together. There are meta-analysis with thousands of patients put together, so much so that there are so many meta-analyses that there are now umbrella analysis, which are multiple meta-analyses joined together to include worldwide data. And they're pretty much supporting. And you can see that we are at an inflection point, a good one this time, because the Americans who have driven the bad stuff are now finally flipped the food triangle upside down.
Thank you very much, Dilo. And if I may move on to a supplementary, subject to Ruan allowing me to go on to that question, is it okay to ask another question?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Thank you, Ruan. Now, on a global perspective, you have alluded to the issues and the challenges with the food industry. And we still, I think, particularly those in the West, are dependent on the global food industry. And given the stance that they take, very much like the pharmaceutical industry, how likely are we to succeed in time to come through the measures that you have advocated?
Well, if we take the cigarette industry, which was the precursor to the same sort of problem, sadly it took us 50 years, but we reversed a lot of the danger from there. The food industry is changing. People have been tracking those 40% of cigarette scientists who moved into the food and the agro and pharma business. Some of them are now moving into the new space of healthy foods because there are companies. I mean, Zoe is a good company, although I said they are not Tim Spector and Zoe, because they have introduced these concepts. And there are many international companies which are just purely going on this new knowledge, and they're publishing data year by year, large numbers. One of the things that has really impressed me is an enormous health insurance company called Swiss Re. And health insurers are not going to be worried by what the food people or the farmers say. Health insurers don't want their insured patients getting ill. And they incentivize people to go on these new things. And I don't have the figures from last year, but I saw it. And it's extraordinarily interesting, where they're getting people benefits, cutting down how much they pay for converting to anti-metabolic health life, metabolic disease health life. And I think certainly the movement for people like the insurance companies will be a good indicator, because they make more money when people are healthy. Whereas big food, big agri, and even doctors and hospitals and nurses, we make money when people are ill. But there's lots of data out there. Just have a look.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to have met you. By the way, I'm your brother's batchmate.
Aha! I will tell him.
And I do have many more, but I won't take your time. Once again, I thank you for your time. I'll let the others ask their questions. Thank you.
So we got Rasika waiting next.
It's me. Thank you, Dilo, for that enlightening lecture. We have had the benefit of your wisdom at home, but we found it difficult to understand the concept of eating a lot of protein instead of a vegetarian-based diet that we follow with little protein. We found it difficult to understand that concept. Maybe we'll come around to it someday and we'll come back to you. My question is about longevity, really. So let's say the hunter-gatherers, their longevity, we know, as far as the historians tell us, was sort of maybe 30, 40 years, whereas following the agrarian revolution, the lifespan of a human being continued to rise with the rise in population as well. So that I fail to understand how you correlate those two events. So if we don't die of cardiovascular disease,
may I answer that point and then you ask me the second point because otherwise it gets confusing?
Okay.
I'll keep your questioning open. Hunter-gatherers, well, they had massive infant mortality, and that was what also skewed all our data coming up to even the 1900s. The second thing was hunter-gathering life was very dangerous. They were attacked and eaten, and they had no antibiotics. They had diseases. So I think we can't genuinely compare hunter-gatherers. Although what's interesting is that the paleontologists will say that a lot of them had good teeth, and they managed to rescue microbial content from frozen guts, and they had good microbiomes. So much so that they had a better microbiome than we have today. But they didn't live as long because they lived in a very, very dangerous world with no medicines and lots of wars between tribes and animals eating them. So I think that goes away. What has happened more recently, and that's why I only compare data coming up from the 1900s, when we were pretty much eating the three main carbs, fats, and meats. We see the inflection points on the graph showing that something went wrong. And you can draw counter graphs. For example, red meat. You can draw a line of red meat across that graph. And people have done that. And you find that if anything, red meat consumption has gone down a bit, whereas colonic cancer and all cancers have gone up in the world. You can draw a graph showing when we started consuming vegetable oils. And that graph almost, especially if you use Z scores, because it's difficult to compare vegetable oil sales or money against how many diabetics. But if you, if you use that data, you'll find that vegetable oil sales almost mimic that same graph inflection points as diabetes, hypertension, and cardiac events and strokes. I think the biggest thing also is not living much longer, although people are desperately trying to live longer. The idea of living longer has taken on, especially among some very, very rich people. And there is one, I think he's a billionaire, who keeps giving himself blood transfusions once a month from his son, on the idea that there might be things there in the younger person's blood which will be helpful. There are all sorts of chemicals being tested for longevity, and there are longevity specialists. But the battle we are fighting, especially for me, is not living longer. There are too many of people living close to 100 and not being very healthy and being sometimes miserable and waiting for death. I faced that with a lot of my family, people who wanted to leave, but living healthier longer. And I always think if I can have a massive heart attack or a massive stroke, which wipes me out, I don't mind dying at 70 rather than 10 years of life in a wheelchair till 80. Now, your second question.
Well, that leads nicely on to the second question. Do you have any evidence to say that pure vegetarians, their lifespan is less
Okay.
than people, for instance, in the blue zone. And what do those people die of in the blue zone? Not cardiac, not mental, not...
Can I pause you there and then again you can take over?
Yeah.
Right. First of all, almost all the blue zones have been wrecked by McDonald's and new food. And for example, Okinawa has reversed itself, and they're the worst part of Japan for food-based disease. There is hardly any, I mean, the Seventh-day Adventists have remained pure vegetarians, but they are now flogging ultra-processed food. They have made it an industry, and we have seen enough stuff to know that ultra-processed food is not great for humans. I think many people believe that. You can live as a vegetarian and still do all of this. I have vegetarian clients. It's tougher because they have to learn a lot. And I would never take on a vegan because that's a hell of a lot of knowledge you need to be trained how to live as a vegan. The commonest thing is how do you get your omega-3s, which are important, because that a lot of it comes from fish oils and fish products. Some of it you can get from liver of creatures. And unfortunately, for a vegan, that is virtually impossible. There are vegan mothers who have been imprisoned for causing damage to their newborn children by bringing them up as vegans. There are people in prison for that, for brain damage. Going to the other side, there is nothing inherently wrong with vegetarianism, except that you can have too much of certain things. How are we for time? I'm happy to keep talking, but who's running this? Is it Rasika?
Ruan is running.
We don't
Yeah.
have a time restriction.
Yeah, no
Okay.
time restriction. Yeah.
I'll tell you what, when you get bored, tell me to shut up. Okay, let's talk about the vegetarians. They can get their proteins very well. I love taking on lacto-vegetarians because lacto-vegetarians with dairy, I can very easily get them adapted to have everything they need. If they eat eggs as well, some of them do, then it's a joy to look after a vegetarian rather than look after somebody who is got lots of unhealthy other problems. So you can be a vegetarian and be in metabolic ketosis. It's not a problem. I had to do some extra learning, and I've used some of my vegetarian friends who do the journey with me to teach me certain things. But vegetarian is very compatible, a bit more hard work. If you can eat meat, and the saddest thing is that if you can eat meat and liver, you can pretty much give up. And there are people in America who have done over 10 years being studied who just live on meat and liver with no carbs at all, except the carbs they get like glycogen from liver and meat. Vegetarians are okay, especially lacto-vegetarians, especially if they eat eggs. Vegans, I have never tried because I think vegans requires an enormous amount of understanding of food and nutrition. As far as the vegetarians, there have been some interesting studies, including from a vegetarian author who recently published a book to show that vegetarians are living maybe the same or possibly some years less on average. The numbers are not yet secure. But vegetarians seem to be living a few years less than somebody who has a mixed omnivore diet, which is more towards carnivore, but with fruit and veg. But I think the big problem is we are at the inflection point. And as I tell people, there's a reason I don't go after trying to train my grandson or my daughter's generation. They have time. This will change. I can see the change in the last 2 years. The food pyramid tipped completely upside down. We don't have time for medicine and this to come up. But most of us here in the audience are doctors. We can go online, we can study, we can learn. We have the ability to pick up knowledge. We have the ability to learn things quickly. And we have training and ability to look at these things scientifically. So I think the answer is, if I can get people thinking today, even if it's only, what crap is that guy talking? But it makes you go and look at the evidence. I think I have succeeded. Do you have any more questions before you relinquish your questions?
No, I think I better let somebody else talk. Thank you.
Thank you
Okay.
very much, Dilo. I do have a question, but I can see another hand up. So let's go to, sorry, is it Roshan?
Yes.
Go on, Roshan.
Thank you, Dilo, for that wonderful, insightful lecture. I'm just wanting to know, because are you better received because you're a doctor and have gone into this field? Would you call yourself a functional medicine sort of? And my thinking is, because even when I, try to tell my husband to, eat healthily or do things more healthily, and he is, just disregards, because I follow all of those people that you have told about, from Zoe to the glucose goddess to Dr. Gandhi to, and try to.
Dr. Gandhi is one of my heroes too.
Yes. And I try to, adopt some of those methods, but I'm told off by a Western physician in the house. But I'm just asking you as to, do your clients feel that you'd be better received because you're a doctor and you have taken on this path?
Right. May I take over and then you continue with more if you need to?
Okay.
I think the biggest motivator people have had is the fact that I am not talking from high ground. I have been a lecturer and a trainer in bad medicine and nutrition for a long time. I was not truly the average eye surgeon who just did cataracts and earned money. I ran medical eye clinics, neuro eye clinics. I looked after lots of bad diabetics. And that gave me a lot of experience. And I regret the number of training sessions I run for bad diabetics, telling them exactly what I now believe was bad for them. I find that I'm glad that Rasika emphasized to me that I should talk about my own journey, because I find people get hooked on the idea that I reversed myself within 6 months of applying. As you might understand, I am driven when I do stuff. It's not the average person. I have a funny brain, but within 6 months, I reversed hypertension, diabetes, even my gastric reflux disappeared massively. I had esophageal strictures where I couldn't swallow things like my favorite steaks. I used to choke on it. And then I had to have lots of omeprazole before I could go back to things like steak. I had to have a very unpleasant scoping done by one of my friends. So at the end, I can say that the hooks are, one, I have had the experience. Personally, I have walked the walk. Second, I'm freely able to tell everybody that I was not 40 years ago telling everybody this and only people are listening to me now. 40 years ago, I was telling exactly the wrong things. Some people like to know how educated and trained and so on, and that's what drove me to get my cheap online, fairly easy to do so-called diplomas. I wouldn't go around bragging that those diplomas are anything like anything I've done with university level. So I think there are several reasons. And what I tell people is, what will it cost you? It will cost you some time, but if you admit that you're not in the greatest health and you're only going to do twice a month meetings with me, especially if you're in a group, it's very helpful. You might need the odd chat between. It will actually cost you less money because intermittent fasting is cheaper than living with 3 meals a day with multiple stuff. If you give up 1 meal a day, you can't fit into a good intermittent fasting eating 3 meals and snacks. And if you give up 1 meal, you're buying less food, you're cooking less, you're shopping less, you're cleaning less, and therefore that's not a burden. You spend less money once you adapt intermittent fasting. You will see benefits. I think the biggest thing I say is within 3 months, if you don't see benefits, you can question whether you should be on this route. And within 3 months, I get people to improve. But I'm not getting people lose 20 kilos in a month. We know that doesn't work. Yo-yo fasting, yo-yo dieting. And we know from lots of studies, including that really horrible American program, The Biggest Loser, that people who massively lose weight in a short spell, they totally damage their metabolic body systems. And some of them, the people who won that thing, one of them, I think, lost 200 odd kilos to win 1 year. His metabolism is still badly damaged 6 years on. He was retested. So the answer is, oh, one more thing.
Yes.
The husbands, the men are usually the worst.
Yeah.
I have many so-called husband households where it's really the wife who is managing it. But fortunately, those households, it's often the wife who cooks. So they have access to manipulating their husbands. Does that answer your first part?
I suppose so, but
Are you based in America? Because you said functional medicine. I know we don't use that much here.
yeah, because I follow the Harvard and Stanford doctors more so because
Okay. Well, you could say something about it because you now have almost a movement towards functional medicine. You also have a movement of psychiatrists. Some of the best-known psychiatrists and oncologists who talk about this come from the States.
yeah.
Yeah, and there's a massive movement in Australia who are inspiring. They have a very good YouTube channel called Low Carb Down Under, and the lectures there are inspiring. Okay, second question.
Yes, because I was thinking, I mean, from the domain, I mean, behavioral change is the hardest, right, to achieve.
Absolutely.
You have to some point explain that after 3 months, you have given your clients that window of time in which
Yes.
they'll see that.
Yeah. Can I pause you there again?
Yeah. From a
my wife is a psychologist, and when I started trying to do it for others, the thing she said was, short term, yeah, you can talk people into doing stuff.
Yeah.
But long term, unless you get them 6 months at least, you can't change habit. And that's why initially I got lots of advice from her. Then I got this, what she finds rather disgusting, cheap diplomas in psychology. But it's taught me a lot. So I can now work on people. And what I also very much like is that you have to win to keep winning. So I give them things they can win at, so that winning becomes truly a habit rather than somebody who says, I've been trying to give up my weight and my diabetes for 10 years. I don't tell them that I'll reverse you in 3 months, but I tell them, why don't we buy little victories? And if you mark each one, I'll show you how that victory leads to a better victory. And so far I have succeeded, but I will fail. I know that. Sorry, next question.
Next question was because since we're all Sri Lankans, I was also looking at your graph and, the vegetable oil and that link, where that change really started happening.
Yeah.
I have tried to convert to avocado and grapeseed. Would you recommend, would these be any better?
Okay, I'll stop you there again. The interesting thing is I have lots of Sri Lankan, well, mostly my vast family of the clan. A lot of them have changed to olive oil already, and that's a big battle already won, because olive oil, of all the non-animal based oils or fats, is probably the best value for money. Avocado is very good. Eating avocados is brilliant, but for several years now, avocado has held its place as one of the superfoods for many reasons. But avocado oil is more expensive than extra virgin olive oil. So I tell people, don't bother with avocado, because you rather spend more money on a better quality of extra virgin. The grape seed, I'm reluctant, because anything from seed, the seeds have to be tortured and chemically altered to get oil out of them. And that's why seed oils contain too much omega-6. Omega-6 is important, but we get so much of it. It is most new nutritional scientists will hold that omega-6 in that amount is damaging. 1-to-1 ratio between 3s and 6s is ideal. Almost impossible to get these days. 2-to-1, where the omega-6s are twice as much as omega-3, is okay. Anything beyond that, you're probably looking at omega-6 toxicity. Linoleic acid has been shown to damage mitochondria that cause problems. So I think you're pretty much okay, but I personally wouldn't recommend grape seed. But the one thing which has come out very strongly, back to a Sri Lankan's happy days, coconut oil is now jumped high up in recommended oils.
Yeah, because of its high smoking point. I mean, I was telling you, I do.
Absolutely. High smoking point, but also we have now got rid of the demon of saturated fats.
Yeah. So I was only telling you was because of the fact that olive oil doesn't have that high smoking point for much
True that. Absolutely.
because of our cooking.
Yeah. No, for high smoking, I'm very chefy. I love cooking. And my wife used to despair of me because I fry so many things in the past. Coconut oil as a base with some butter added on top is probably the best mix for shallow frying. If you're into deep frying, I think do it rarely and then just use vegetable oil because you can't have that much butter floating around in a deep fat fryer. But the main thing is that sort of frying you should limit.
So you would also recommend then ghee, right? From that point.
Ghee, the winners on this battle, which have been done head to head in some studies, coconut oil survives. Olive oil, very good for non-heat, adding to things and using low heat. Butter is excellent. Lard is great, except that it is produced from pig fat, and there are some questions about, I'll come to that in just a second. Tallow from beef is highly recommended, and ghee is highly recommended. Just going back to the pig, the problem is, now there is a phrase that you would have all heard, you are what you eat. That phrase is now changing because we now say you are what you ate. And the problem is, if the animal has been fed the wrong food, the fat they contain often have the toxins. So that's why there's a big movement to get beef which is grass-fed or grass-finished. That's one of the reasons I like to tell people about lamb in the UK, because our lamb, a lot of them are not fed mass amounts of corn or grain to fatten them up. Pig is a mix because I think in reality, pigs are pretty good at detoxifying anything, but they probably have too much omega and things residual in their fat. And we know that body fat stores, for example, people who smoked a lot of ganja, they give it up, and then years later when they lose weight, we find that cannabinol, the oil, gets released into their system and suddenly they get a high. So we have to be cautious about what goes into our fat. And that's also one of the reasons that when I get people to move to fat burning, I want them to do it gently, because otherwise they're releasing whatever toxins were stored with the fat. And that's part of why you need to learn and not try to hit this you don't hit this at a run. You give yourself a year, 6 months to a year, plan it ahead, and you will succeed.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Next question from Rasika again.
Firstly, thank you very much, Dio, for an excellent and revolutionary talk, as it were. Certainly quite a change from what you and I learned in med school.
So much so.
Yeah.
At least you didn't go around for 30 years telling diabetics to do all the things that they're not to do now.
So I have a question and a comment.
Go on.
When we invited you home and we had this discussion as well, and Ajanta commented about the high fat, high protein, low carb, it is more or less the Atkins diet, isn't it?
To some extent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then anecdotally, I've been going around singing your praises and all that. And there are anecdotes of people sort of having coronaries and what have you.
There will always be.
Yeah, having followed the Atkins diet, but also you were an advocate for stopping the statins as well.
Statins, there's a massive worldwide movement saying statins are waste of money and waste of things in most conditions. That I used to be the chair of drugs and therapeutics for all of Croydon for many years. When the first statin came, we were so excited. We gave it to people who already came in with heart attacks. Then the company pretty much got every person who had a heart attack to have a statin. Then they came up with primary prevention. Then they started dropping ages of people for primary prevention. They came up with little devices. At that time, it wasn't much online. We had little devices they gave us free to feed in the numbers to show that they needed statins. We have now discovered that statins, I'll give you a very good example. There have been several enormous studies putting the real data from statins together, because we are now allowed, in most cases, access to data. Freedom of information means that if a scientist is interested, they can demand the data under freedom of information. And they can get somebody else, a statistician, unrelated, to put it through statistics. And one of the key papers, showed that if you are put on primary prevention 5 years on, you will live on average 4 days longer after 5 years of statins. On average, some people more, some people less. But you won't live those extra 4 years when you're fit and well. That will be at the end of your life, when you might be praying that you're dying and don't want the 4 days. The next thing is, 5 years, how many complications can you get? Now, there's a lovely website, entirely free, called Numbers to Treat, and we all know Numbers to Treat. So if you put the numbers to treat for a statin, you find to save a life, you spend so many years, within which many people have become diabetic, because statins make you diabetic or makes diabetes worse. That's well known because it blocks GLP-1. Statins give you mental health, memory problems, which are fortunately reversible. So, but the problem is, when you get to our ages, when we get any mental health problems, people say, well, what can you expect? And they say, well, Alzheimer's. I find that I tell people, look, your primary prevention, lack of statin is not going to kill you. And within a month, will you notice a difference? But more to the point, will you get your family involved, and will they notice a difference? And that's beginning to pay off, because there are people beginning to say that I don't know why I'm on a statin. I play so much cricket. I have people who are giving up cricket because they get statin-related muscle problems, which is one of the commonest side effects. A lot of them are reversible when you stop. Some of them are not, you're stuck for life. So altogether, I mean, there's a very eminent American cardiologist who is a Asian, so he's very outspoken, like many of us. And he starts his lecture saying, statins are the most useless drug that was ever invented. And he goes on to prove his points. I mean, there are many American cardiologists who are now agreed with the statin thing. Dr. Gundry is a cardiac specialist. We just mentioned the name. He strongly advocates plant-based, although he doesn't say you don't eat meat. There are many experts who have changed. I'm not an expert. I just learned and I followed. I haven't done a single experiment myself. I haven't run multi-center studies on this, but there is evidence bursting through, and more evidence. And one of the most remarkable things is that when you put together the data from studies which claimed one thing, you find that they show something else. The most famous of that is the Minnesota, I think it's called the Heart Study, something like 60,000 women. For that time, they did the study in the 1970s, and it cost millions. So it was one of the most remarkable studies funded by the National Institute of Health. 10 years later, they finished the study. They didn't publish it for 30 years. And when they published it, the fact that it didn't show that having saturated fat caused more deaths was hidden in page 30-something. They produced an enormous document. The last surviving scientist of the group was interviewed by a journalist who specialized in nutrition. He admitted that the reason they didn't publish it was because the results were disappointing. And because he was feeling guilty coming towards the end of his life, he bequeathed all the data which he had stolen from his hospital and had in his cellar as old data tapes, so they had to actually convert it to analyze it. And 30 years on, independent group of scientists showed that, in fact, it showed that there was no advantage for the statin groups, low saturated fat group. And we know from data even recently showing that 3 out of 4 people in Western countries who end up in hospitals with heart attacks, cardiac disease, coronary artery disease, have low so-called cholesterol, bad cholesterol. Once I gave up my medical license, as a coach, I can't tell people to stop drugs. That would be incredibly dangerous for me. But I genuinely tell people, if it were me, and I have done it myself, just give it up. There's very little space for statins except in a few. Statins have 2 effects, and this is one of the reasons, conflicting. Statins are very good anti-inflammatory, which we didn't realize. So on the one hand, they cause all sorts of problems, including diabetes and memory loss and muscle problems. But on the other hand, they reduce body inflammation, which is caused by all our toxins and our fructose and our alcohol. So some of the benefits are coming from statins as an anti-inflammatory rather than statins as anti-LDL, because it primarily works against LDL. And the other remarkable study which came up was that they showed that if you ignore cardiac deaths, and the reason you ignore cardiac deaths is cholesterol is found on plaque, because cholesterol, if you can go back to old-fashioned pathology, Muir's pathology, it told us that cholesterol was deposited in chronic inflammation. So when we dug it out of coronary artery plaque, when we blamed cholesterol, that was silly because cholesterol is a part of chronic inflammatory repair. But if you do all case mortality, lower than average LDL causes more deaths than higher than average. So the curve is a U-shaped. There's a zone near the middle, which we are now beginning to see in lots of diseases. We call it the Goldilocks zone. Too much or too less seem to work against us. But in the case of statins, too little kills us from other causes than cardiac deaths, than the total number. So if you look at total all-cause mortality, it's worse with low LDL than high LDL. I finished my answer.
Yeah, thank you. The other is a comment, Dilo. I mean, most of the audience is Sri Lankans, and the Sri Lankan diet is high carb and not so much protein. It is fair enough to advise high protein, low carb diet, but practicality in Sri Lanka particularly, where it is expensive, carbs are the cheapest. I mean, in our recent visit, we even didn't see so much of vegetables being eaten in the Sri Lankan diet. And it's not a criticism, but an economic issue as well.
I totally agree, because carbs are the cheapest food you can get, because the agribusiness made it that. But if I go back on that, first of all, it would be lovely to save Sri Lanka, but if I can save a few more people in the UK and Australia and America, I would feel happy when I die, and we can have what we want. Low carb doesn't mean no carb. So there are ways to live with carbs, and that Jesse Inchauspi's method of how you eat the order of food, if you coat your carbs with oils and with fiber, you will get less diabetes, you will lose weight. It's not just her. Many people have shown the evidence that all those methods work. So that's what I tell people. If you do nothing else, just follow that Jesse Inchauspi's method of how you eat rather than changing any of the foods. The only thing she strongly recommends is not to have carbs for breakfast, just to change to a protein, eggs and bacon and sausages and stuff, cooked breakfast. And low carb, high fat, the benefits start when you get your carbs down to 20% or less of your calories. I'm not advocating counting, but it's not difficult to convert from a high carb to low carb if it's less than 20% of your calories for the day. And if you coat your carbs with pre-eating your fiber and having any oils with your carbs, and you have it as a main meal, I have clients who will eat the same amount of carbs they had, but they will then make sure they follow Jesse's idea of having your salads and things first, and adding oils to your carbs. And you can see some wonderful graphs using CGM data, where having the same meal, identical amount of calories and carbs, you just add an avocado or throw in some olive oil, and your glucose drops. And the other thing is not to have high carbs or any carbs really as snacks. Have them in your main meal and have the highest carbs. Like if you're having desserts, you got to eat them within half an hour while the stomach still contains a lot of the fiber and a lot of the oils to mix with. Clothing your carbs. Don't eat naked carbs is the lesson. But interestingly, I mean, people would call me a batgula. I used to eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner rice. I hardly have rice now. I've learned that it was one of those things that we got used to, and I thought I'm really going to miss it. I like having some rice, and I have rice when I feel I want to. But I am quite happy now eating a lovely curry with nothing else. And that would have been so strange to imagine that I could have a chicken curry with nothing else, but I can have a chicken curry with nothing else. And then you also appreciate your food better because you don't mix everything together.
Thank you.
Okay.
I don't see any other hands raised. Ajahn, yeah.
I'll tell Rasika to cook fried rice for me every day.
I know you will. But listen, if you cook fried rice and use butter and things,
yeah,
it'll be so much better than having rice.
right. Can I make a comment?
Of course.
It's just well, you have given us a lot of food for thought.
Hopefully not food.
And thought about foods.
Yeah.
But one of your slides said that our mental well-being,
Yeah.
we need our social circles. And I think...
Not just mental.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, go on.
So I think, if I may, you have failed miserably in that. You have failed to join our social circles.
Ajanta, I was just avoiding you, mate. I have my own circles.
Okay. I believe. Okay, sorry about that.
No, I'm massively social bound with. I got a clan, which is when we got to COVID, I linked all the clan together so that we could talk to each other while we were on lockdown. And we have 60 families around the world linked together on a single WhatsApp thing.
We hope to see you in our social circles as well. More.
I don't have time. I'm playing cricket and I'm doing stuff, and I still have to be loyal to the groups I already made up.
Okay.
And have some time for my wife, otherwise she'll kick me out. She's smiling, but not in a nice way.
We can't see her.
I'm thinking about it.
Can we see her?
Ali?
Yeah.
They would like to see you.
Off my work jacket.
She's in a gardening kit, so you'll have to forgive her.
No. A quick transformation.
All right. Here's Alison, who's put up with me.
Hi, Alison.
Hello there. Oh, I've heard a little bit. I've been working today, so I literally have just come in for a few minutes to go in the garden.
I see you are feeding him the right things.
Oh, he
She's
does.
tried.
Yes. But hopefully you found his talk beneficial today.
Yes, thanks to you.
I think as
Well,
always,
Might
Something
help with the Zoom account, I think.
Yeah.
Please don't tell her things like that.
I shall hand you back over to him.
as always, Sati wants to have a last word. Go on, Sati.
Yes, last word, but in lighter vein though. Dilo, I remember you telling Roshan about manipulating the food. I can tell you that, in my home, I have a psychiatrist and a housewife who has been trying to do that, driving me to the point of divorce now. So it can be a dangerous advice. So just,
Well, it depends on what type of psychiatrist. If they're psychotherapists, they tend to be pushy like me. My wife does a lot of coaching, which is more gentle. So just tell her she's got to be gentle. Lisa's laughing.
Okay, I will send her to you for counseling. Thank you.
Right, because there are no more questions, it's time to wind this session down. So, Dilo, thank you so very much for participating in the Sri Lankan Literary Society program and sharing your thoughts on healthy life, healthy diet, and loads of other things which we learned today. And this is the time which we want everybody to put up your videos and probably the audio as well. So I'll give a few seconds for everybody to open up. You can see some of them, probably some of them you might know. So thank you very much, Dilo. As usual, we would like to thank you in our usual manner by giving you a clap. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And if I could greet you back and say thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much. And Rasika and Aja, thank you very much for taking a lead on this and inviting Dilo to the SLLS program. Thank you so much. Good afternoon for those of you who are in UK, and good evening for those of you joining from Sri Lanka. Thank you.
Thank you for organizing, everybody, and thank you for attending.
Thank you.